Agnes Reed, woman whose internal metronome was calibrated to the gentle turning of the seasons and the precise pH of her garden soil, began every morning the same way. At precisely 6:30 a.m., she would step onto her back patio, clutching a mug of Earl Grey tea, steam coiling into the cool dawn air like a phantom. This ritual was her anchor, a moment of silent communion with the life's work that sprawled before her, the Willow Creek Commons shared garden, and at its heart, its crowning glory, were her roses. Not just any roses. These were Rosa Eglantine's Triumph, a heritage strain she had spent a decade coaxing into perfection. Their petals were the color of a blushing debutante's cheek, their fragrance a complex symphony of fruit and spice that had won her the Tri-County Horticultural Fair's grand prize for years running. They were her pride, her joy, her legacy. On this particular Tuesday in late May, the steam from her tea was whipped away by an unseasonable breeze. Agnes took a sip, her eyes scanning the familiar landscape, the robust lavender bushes, the burgeoning tomato vines staked with military precision, the neat rows of kale, and then, her eyes reached the center of the garden. The mug slipped from her grasp. It did not shatter. It landed with a dull, sickening thud on the grass, a dark stain of tea spreading like a wound. Agnes's mind, usually a well-ordered library of botanical names and planting schedules, went entirely, terrifyingly blank. Where her award-winning roses had stood just yesterday, a testament to patience and pedigree, there now loomed a thing. It was a grotesque ziggurat of gray cinder blocks, stacked 4 feet high. From its jagged openings, a tangle of white PVC pipes jutted out at aggressive angles, like the fractured bones of some concrete beast. A few sad, wilted strawberry plants, their roots caked in dry soil, were unceremoniously shoved into the pipe openings. A small glistening solar panel, perched precariously on the top block, caught the morning sun and glinted with what felt like pure, unadulterated mockery. Silence was broken by the sound of her own breathing a ragged, shallow gasp. The Eglantine's Triumph roses were gone. Not trimmed, not transplanted, vanished. In their place stood this monument to horticultural barbarism. A tremor started in Agnes's hands and worked its way up her arms. This wasn't the work of vandals. Vandals were chaotic, senseless. This had a purpose. A hideously misguided, technologically abhorrent purpose. There was only one person who could have conceived of such an atrocity, her new neighbor in 2B, Leo. She had only exchanged a few pleasantries with him since he'd moved in a month ago. He was young, perpetually clad in headphones and athletic, where, with the kind of restless energy that made her want to repot him in calming soil, he worked in tech, a word he used with the same vague reverence others reserved for medicine or art. He at once, upon seeing her meticulously weedy, and remarked, "You know, there's an app for that." She had smiled a smile as thin and brittle as a dried leaf. Now, that smile was a distant memory. Fury, cold and pure, flooded the void left. By shock she didn't march to his door. Marching was for soldiers. Agnes advanced with the grim, unstoppable force of a creeping vine, her slippers silent on the dewy lawn. She didn't knock, she pressed the doorbell with a sustained, unwavering pressure, as if trying to push the button straight through the doorframe and into his very soul. The door swung open to reveal Leo, looking offensively cheerful. He was holding a protein shake and, indeed, wearing enormous headphones. He pulled them down around his neck, a tinny beat leaking out. "Aggie, morning. Did you see it?" He beamed, his smile wide and utterly guileless. Surprise. Agnes's voice, when it came, was a low growl that seemed to dredge up soil from the depths of her being. "Where are my roses?" Leo blinked, his smile faltering slightly at her tone. "Oh, the old thorny things. Don't worry, I saved them." He gestured vaguely with his shaker cup towards the communal compost bin at the edge of the property. "They'll break down and provide some killer nitrogen for the new system. It's all part of the cycle. I just optimized the central plot. It's a closed-loop hydroponic vertical farms powered. I'm a testing a new nutrient solution. I coded myself. The potential yield per square foot is like 400% higher than your traditional single-plane planting." He said it all with such breathless, unadulterated pride. He truly believed he had performed a miracle. He thought he had helped. He had looked at her life's work, the culmination of a decade of love and labor, and seen only an inefficient use of square footage. He had optimized it. He had composted her 4-time champion roses. For a moment, Agnes felt a strange, dizzying calm, the kind that precedes a hurricane. She could see the headlines. Retired botanist snaps blood, tech bro with his own cinder block. She imagined the feel of the rough, gray concrete in her hands. But she was Agnes Reed. Her battles were fought not with brute force, but with patience, with knowledge, with the undeniable laws of nature. She looked from Leo's expectant, smiling face to the hideous gray monolith that had replaced her garden's heart. "Leo," she said, her voice now dangerously soft, "you have just declared war." His smile finally vanished, replaced by a look of utter confusion. "War? What? It's just strawberries. Everybody loves strawberries. This isn't about strawberries, you silicon-brained Philistine," she whispered. turning away before he could see the tears of rage welling in her eyes. This is about roots. She walked back to her patio, her spine ramrod straight. The war had begun. He may have had his apps, his solar panels, and his hideous PVC pipes, but she had something far more powerful. She had the earth itself on her side. And the earth, as Leo was about to find out, always wins. She picked up her fallen mug. It wasn't broken, merely dirtied, a fitting symbol. She could be cleaned. She could be refilled, and she could be brought to a righteous boil. Agnes's initial strategy was not one of scorched earth, but of exquisitely targeted passive-aggressive ecological warfare. Ripping out Leo's concrete monstrosity would be crude, and worse, it would put her in violation of the Willow Creek Commons HOA bylaw, specifically Clause 7, Section B. Destruction or unilateral alteration of shared community assets is strictly prohibited. Leo's tower, as horrifying as it was now a shared asset. Mrs. Gable, the HOA president, and a woman whose spine was made of pure reinforced bureaucracy, would have a field day with that. No, Agnes would fight on her own terms. Leo wanted to A/B test his nutrient solution. Fine, she would introduce a few variables he hadn't accounted for. Her campaign began subtly. On a trip to the organic nursery, she procured 3 small, innocent-looking pots of lemon balm. It was a lovely herb with a pleasant scent, a member of the mint family. A very, very enthusiastic member of the mint family. She planted them a strategic 10 feet from the base of his tower. To the untrained eye, it was a charming addition. To Agnes, it was the deployment of a rhizomatic sleeper agent. The roots, she knew, would travel underground, a silent, fragrant army, and in a season or two, they would be popping up inside his cinder blocks and strangling his PVC pipes from within. It was a long game. Her next move was more immediate. Aphids, every gardener's foe, but also a tool. Specifically, the rosy apple aphid, which had a particular fondness for tender new growth, like, for instance, the leaves of fragile strawberry plants. She knew that a patch of nearby nasturtiums acted as a trap crop for them. Her own nasturtiums, planted far from her prized vegetables, were currently teeming that evening. Under the cloak of twilight, Agnes performed what she called a pest relocation program. With a delicate camel hair brush, she gently coaxed a few dozen of the tiny green insects from her nasturtium leaves onto a large maple leaf. Then, with the stealth of a cat burglar, she crept to the base of Leo's tower and tenderly transferred her cargo to his prized strawberry plants. She felt a twinge of guilt, but squashed it. All's fair in love and horticulture. Within 3 days, the results were glorious. The leaves on Leo's strawberries began to yellow and curl. A fine sticky honeydew aphid on the PVC pipes. Leo, however, did not react as she'd expected. He didn't despair. He saw it not as a setback, but as a data point. A new problem to be solved with more technology. Aha! Pest infestation, he declared when he saw her in the garden 2 days later. He was holding a small drone-like object in his hand. My sensor array picked up the biomass anomaly. Classic vector, but I've got the solution. No pesticides. All natural. Even installed his solution, 3 solar-powered ultrasonic pest repellers. They were sleek, black stakes he drove into the ground around his tower. They emitted a sound, he explained proudly, that was scientifically calibrated to drive aphids, mites, and other small pests mad. The sound was, he assured her, completely undetectable by the human ear. This was false. For Agnes, it was not undetectable at all. It was a high-frequency, piercing whine that drilled directly into her brain stem. It was a constant, maddening ee that started the moment the sun rose and didn't stop until it set. It made her fillings ache and her vision swim. Leo, 20 years her junior, and likely with some hearing loss from his ever-present headphones, couldn't hear a thing. He'd stroll around his blighted tower, frowning at the still-dying strawberries. The aphids, it turned out, didn't mind the noise one bit, while Agnes felt like her skull was being vibrated apart. The war had escalated. He had inadvertently deployed sonic weaponry. This brought her to her final, most potent weapon, sent. If he was going to assault her ears, she would assault his nose. The answer was fish emulsion, an ancient, revered, and profoundly stinky organic fertilizer. It smelled, to put it mildly, like the rancid ghost of a forgotten cannery. She bought the largest bottle she could find. Following the directions for a foliar spray, she mixed a potent batch in her watering can and waited for a day with a slight breeze blowing directly from her side of the garden towards his patio. Then, she gave all her tomatoes, the kale, the lavender, everything surrounding his central tower a thorough, drenching drink. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. A wall of putrid, fishy air rolled across the garden and settled directly over Leo's curated outdoor space. It was magnificent. He stumbled out his door half an hour later, a laptop under his arm, clearly intending to work on his patio. He stopped, dead, his nose wrinkling. Whoa, what is that smell? Smells like a whale died. Agnes was pruning her non-champion, but still lovely daisies nearby, wearing a beatific smile. Oh, that. It's just a little organic fertilizer. Very good for the soil microbiome. You have to feed the earth. You know, it's all about giving back. His eyes narrowed. For the first time, a flicker of suspicion seemed to cross his face. He looked from her overly innocent expression to his wilting, aphid-infested strawberries, and then he sniffed the air again, a look of dawning horror on his face. He was finally realizing this wasn't a series of unfortunate events. This was a coordinated attack. The final straw, however, was not the smell, nor the noise, nor the aphids. It was the HOA. Mrs. Gable's beige sedan pulled into the Willow Creek Commons parking lot the next morning. She emerged holding a clipboard, her sensible shoes making determined, squelching sounds on the damp grass. She had received, she announced to both Agnes and Leo, who had emerged from their respective homes like two wary generals, multiple anonymous complaints. One regarding unpleasant odors, another regarding unusual and persistent, high-frequency sounds, and a third, more bizarrely, about a structurally unsound cinder block installation. The board is holding an emergency mediation session tomorrow at 10 a.m., Mrs. Gable stated, her voice leaving no room for argument. The bylaws are very clear about community harmony. We have a process. You will both present your cases, and we will find a resolution. She gave the fish-stinking air a disgusted sniff. Eyed Leo's concrete tower as if it were a personal affront to her soul, and then fixed Agnes with a look that said, I know you think you're clever, but don't test me. Agnes's heart sank. A mediation? A formal hearing? The conflict was no longer their private, undeclared war fought with bugs and botany. It was about to become official. It was about to be buried in paperwork and adjudicated by people who thought AstroTurf was a viable landscaping choice. As Mrs. Gable marched away, clipboard held high. Leo looked at Agnes. The oblivious enthusiasm was gone, replaced by a weary resignation. My strawberries are dead, he said flatly. I can't hear myself think, she retorted. The high-pitched whine of his pestropeller seeming to intensify in the sudden silence between them, they stood there. Amidst the wreckage of their battlefield, the stinking air, the sonic assault, the dying monument to tech hubris, they had fought each other to a standstill, only to be brought down by a common, far more powerful enemy, the Homeowners Association, and tomorrow, they would have to face it together. The HOA mediation meeting was held in Mrs. Gable's living room, a space so immaculately beige it felt less like a home and more like the waiting room to the afterlife. Two other board members were present. A man named Stan, whose primary contribution was to sigh heavily at regular intervals, and a woman named Brenda, who knitted throughout the entire proceeding, the click-clack of her needles providing a judgmental rhythm. Agnes came, prepared with a laminated chart detailing the seasonal light requirements of the central garden plot. Leo arrived with a PowerPoint presentation on his tablet titled Project Strawberry, a paradigm shift in hyperlocal agriculture. It was a disaster. Agnes spoke of heritage, of soil composition, of the delicate ecosystem she had cultivated over a decade. Brenda paused her knitting to ask if the Eglantine's Triumph roses were deer-resistant. They were not. A demerit was. Noted. Leo then launched into his presentation, filled with graphs, acronyms, and talk of scalable solutions and disrupting traditional horticulture. Stan sighed so heavily he seemed to deflate slightly in his armchair. When Leo got to the slide about the ultrasonic pest repellers, Mrs. Gable held up a hand. Mr. Chen, according to complaint A7, this device of yours is causing auditory distress to your neighbors. That's impossible, Leo said, with the unflinching certainty of a man who trusts his own code. The frequency is 25 kilohertz. The average adult human can't hear above 20. It's science. Well, Mrs. Reed can hear it, Mrs. Gable said, looking at Agnes. Can't you, Agnes? It sounds like 1,000 tiny dentists drilling into my soul, Agnes confirmed, earning a vigorous nod from Brenda. The meeting devolved from there. They argued about the structural integrity of cinder blocks, the olfactory properties of fish emulsion, and the migratory patterns of aphids. It became clear that the board wasn't interested in nuance or passion. They were interested in eliminating problems. Finally, Mrs. Gable slapped her hand on her coffee table, rattling the beige ceramic coasters. Enough, she declared. This bickering is precisely the kind of disharmony Clause 1, Section A is designed to prevent. It is clear that you two are incapable of managing the shared space collaboratively. She exchanged a look with Stan and Brenda. It was the look of a tribunal that had already reached its verdict. The board has decided on a proactive solution, Mrs. Gable announced, her voice dripping with finality. To ensure fairness and eliminate all future sources of conflict, the central garden plot will be neutralized. We are hiring Evergreen Corporate Landscaping to install a standardized low-maintenance solution. They will be here Monday to rip everything out and install a lovely, modern rock garden with 3 drought-resistant ornamental grasses. It will be tidy, uniform, and above all, quiet. A rock garden. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Agnes felt the blood drain from her face. A rock garden. The horticultural equivalent of a lobotomy. Lifeless, soulless, greenless gravel. All her work, the tomatoes, the lavender, the kale, the soil she had spent years enriching on, replaced by rocks. She looked at Leo. His face was a mask of disbelief. His jaw was hanging open, his tech-savvy bravado completely short-circuited. You can't, he stammered. The data, the potential for sustainable food production. We're not producing food, Mr. Chen, Stan sighed, as if explaining something to a toddler. We're managing property values. The meeting was adjourned. Agnes and Leo were dismissed, 2 condemned prisoners informed of their execution date. They walked out of Mrs. Gable's beige sanctum into the bright sunlight, blinking. The world seemed sharper, the greens of their embattled garden more vibrant, more precious. They stopped in the middle of the lawn, the space between their 2 homes that had become a no man's land. The faint fishy smell still lingered in the air, a ghost of their recent conflict. A rock garden, Leo said, his voice hollow. They're going to replace it with rocks. And 3 ornamental grasses, Agnes added grimly. Probably fountain grass. It's always fountain grass. It's the beige of the plant world. For the first time, they weren't adversaries, they were allies, united by a common, terrifying enemy, corporate landscaping. The threat of evergreen was so monstrous, so anathema to everything both of them believed in, albeit for different reasons, that it eclipsed their personal war entirely. Agnes's meticulously cultivated ecosystem and Leo's futuristic farm were both about to be paved over and replaced with sterile uniformity. This is your fault, Agnes said, but there was no heat in it. My fault, he shot back, a spark of his old self returning. You're the one who summoned an aphid army and tried to gas me out with fish guts. You're the one who built an ugly concrete tomb on top of my award-winning roses, and then gave me to— They glared at each other for a moment, and then, a strange thing happened. A small bubble of laughter escaped Leo's lips. It was a shocked, helpless sound. Then Agnes felt her own lips twitch. It was absurd. The whole thing was utterly, profoundly absurd. They had been so focused on their petty war that they hadn't seen the real threat massing on their borders. Okay, Leo said, running a hand through his hair. Okay, truce. A truce is insufficient, Agnes replied, her mind already working, calculating, planning. What we need is an alliance, a plan. They're coming on Monday. That gives us 4 days. Leo looked from her determined face to the garden, their garden, his failed strawberry tower, her fragrant, recovering plants. It was all about to be obliterated. What kind of plan, he asked, a new light in his eyes. It wasn't the manic glint of a tech evangelist. It was the focused gleam of a conspirator. Agnes allowed herself a small, grim smile. Mrs. Gable and her board want a standardized low-maintenance solution. They want to see collaboration. So, we will give it to them. We are going to design a garden together. A garden so beautiful, so innovative, and so perfectly integrated, that even a soulless bureaucrat like Mrs. Gable won't be able to deny it. She looked at his cinderblock tower with newfound consideration. Your vertical design. The concept is not entirely without merit. It is merely aesthetically bankrupt and poorly executed. Leo looked at her surrounding plants, and your soil is incredible. The microbiome must be off the charts. But your pest control methods are medieval. A fragile, unspoken understanding past. Between them, it was a desperate last-ditch effort, an alliance born of mutual annihilation. The botanist and the tech bro. Tradition and disruption. They were going to have to learn to speak each other's language, and they had 4 days to do it. The war was over. The resistance had just begun. The next 4 days were a blur of frenetic activity, a fusion of dirt and data. Leo's patio became their war room, his outdoor table littered with Agnes's dog-eared botany textbooks, seed catalogs, and hand-drawn sketches, alongside his tablet displaying 3D modeling software and spreadsheets calculating water distribution. The fishy smell had dissipated, replaced by the scent of fresh coffee and frantic creation. Their first conversation was awkward, like 2 diplomats from opposing galaxies trying to find common ground. So, the core problem with your tower, Agnes began, circling the cinderblock monstrosity with a critical eye, is that it's ugly, it repels life. A garden should invite you in, not look like a defensive fortification. The core problem with your layout, Leo countered, pointing at her neat rows, is inefficiency. All this horizontal space for a low-yield return. We need to think axis, and your methods are so labor-intensive. We can automate the tedious parts, freeing you up for the art. It was there, in that simple exchange, that they found their starting point. Agnes would be the art, the curator of life, the expert on what to plant and where. Leo would be the science, the engineer of the systems that would help it thrive. Their first joint project was dismantling the cinderblock tower. It was a symbolic act, tearing down the very thing that started the war. As they hauled the heavy blocks to a corner of the yard, they started to talk. Really talk? No. I grew up in an apartment in the city, Leo admitted, wiping sweat from his brow. The closest I got to a garden was a sad-looking basil plant on the windowsill that my mom always forgot to water. I got obsessed with the idea of growing your own food, you know? This whole project? He gestured to the dismantled pipe. Was my attempt to prove that you could create abundance anywhere, even with no space, no experience. I guess I got a little carried away. Agnes paused, a cinderblock in her hands. She looked at him, not as the vandal who had destroyed her roses, but as a young man with a passion she understood, even if his methods were alien. "My husband, Arthur, and I started this garden together," she said softly, her voice thick with memory. "He built the original rose beds. After he passed, I poured everything into it, especially the roses. Winning those competitions, it felt like I was keeping his memory alive, keeping a part of him here." She looked towards the compost bin where the remains of her champions lay. "When you tore them out, it felt like you were tearing out the last piece of him." The confession hung in the air between them. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact, a window into the grief that had fueled her rage. Leo looked stunned, his face etched with a dawning, horrified understanding. "Agnes, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. I just saw old plants and thought I could make something better." "I know," she said, and for the first time she truly did. That moment changed everything. The animosity dissolved, replaced by a shared sense of purpose and a delicate, growing respect. The project was no longer about defeating the HOA. It was about creating something worthy of both their passions. They designed with a furious synergy. Leo proposed a new vertical structure, but this time, he let Agnes lead the design. They chose warm, red cedar wood instead of concrete. It would be a series of tiered, cascading planter boxes, creating a living wall that was both beautiful and productive. "We can integrate a drip irrigation system," Leo said, sketching on his tablet. "I can code it to deliver specific water amounts to each tier. Your ferns on the bottom can get more moisture, while the succulents on top stay drier. And if we use cedar," Agnes added, her eyes gleaming with excitement, "it naturally repels insects. We can intersperse marigolds and rosemary for aesthetics and pest control. A living system, not a sterile one." She taught him about companion planting, how basil planted near tomatoes improves their flavor, how beans fix nitrogen in the soil for corn. He in turn showed her how to use a simple app he designed to monitor soil moisture and temperature in real. She was skeptical at first, preferring the feel of the soil in her hands, but had to admit the precision was useful. The climax of their collaboration was the presentation. It wasn't a mediation this time. They had requested a spot at the Sunday evening community meeting. When their turn came, they didn't just stand up and talk. They unveiled their plan. Leo had created a stunning 3D rendering on his tablet, which he projected onto a portable screen. It showed the proposed garden from all angles, cycling through the seasons to show how it would look year-round. Agnes had brought physical samples, a piece of the red cedar, a pot of fragrant rosemary, and a detailed planting chart titled, "The Willow Creek Harvest and Heritage Garden, a synthesis of tradition and innovation." Agnes spoke first, her voice resonating with a passion the board had never heard from her before. She spoke of community, of beauty, of creating a space that would be a living, breathing asset to them all. She even honored her old adversary. "Leo's vision for verticality and efficiency will allow us to grow more than ever before, produce we can share as a community." Then Leo spoke, and he didn't use a single piece of tech jargon. He talked about respecting the history of the garden, about learning from Agnes's decades of wisdom. "This plan," he said, gesturing to the screen where a digital bee buzzed around a rendered lavender flower, "isn't about disrupting anything, it's about integrating. It combines Agnes's incredible knowledge of the what with a little bit of my knowledge of the how. It will be beautiful, productive, and, Mrs. Gable," he added with a slight smile, "extremely low maintenance, thanks to the automated systems." They presented a budget that was, miraculously, cheaper than the quote from Evergreen Landscaping. They presented a work plan. They presented a vision. When they finished, the room was silent. Stan was not sighing. Brenda's knitting needles were still. Mrs. Gable looked from the glowing screen to their two earnest faces. Standing side by side, she cleared her throat. "The board will need to deliberate," she said, but the bureaucratic stiffness in her voice was gone, replaced by something that sounded suspiciously like the board's deliberation was, by Mrs. Gable's standards, lightning fast. The email arrived the next morning, a single sentence that felt more momentous than a 1,000-page treaty. "The board has voted unanimously to approve the Harvest and Heritage Garden proposal, effective immediately." A wave of triumphant relief washed over Agnes. She looked out her window at Leo, who was checking his phone on his patio. He looked up, caught her eye, and gave her a brilliant, celebratory grin and a thumbs up. The war was won. The resistance had succeeded. The week that followed was one of joyous, backbreaking work. The dreaded Evergreen landscapers never came. Instead, the community came. Word of their presentation had spread, and their project had captured the imagination of their neighbors. Stan, the sighing board member, turned out to be surprisingly handy with a circular saw and helped Leo build the cedar structure. Brenda, the knitter, arrived with a flat of heirloom tomato seedlings she'd started in her apartment. People offered to help dig, carry soil, and plant. The garden transformed. The ugly barren patch in the center became a testament to their unified vision. The elegant cedar tiers rose up, soon filled with rich, dark soil that Agnes had lovingly amended with her best compost. Leo, true to his word, installed a discreet and clever irrigation system, with tiny tubes snaking invisibly through the structure. They planted together, a seamless team now. Agnes would indicate the spot for a new basil plant, and Leo would be there with the trowel. He'd point out that the sun tracking on his app suggested a particular corner would be perfect for sun-loving peppers, and she'd nod in agreement, fetching the seedlings. One sunny afternoon, as they were finishing the last tier, Agnes disappeared. Into her small potting shed, she emerged a moment later, holding a small, unassuming pot. In it was a single, fragile-looking green shoot with 2 small leaves. "What's that?" Leo asked, wiping his hands on his jeans. "I took a few cuttings from the Eglantine's Triumph before," she said, her voice soft. "Just in case. Most of them didn't take. But this one did. It's a survivor." She approached the new cedar structure. At its very heart, in the most prominent sun-drenched spot, was a planter box they had left empty. With a reverence that moved him, she gently transplanted the tiny rose cutting into its new home. It looked small and vulnerable, surrounded by the grand new structure, but it was there. It had roots. Their routine settled into a comfortable rhythm. The morning ritual changed. Now Agnes would step out with 2 mugs of tea, and Leo would meet her by the garden. They would inspect the day's progress, celebrate a new sprout, or debate the best way to stake the burgeoning pea vines. The hype whine of the pest repeller was a distant, comical memory. The garden was quiet, save for the buzz of bees and their own easy conversation. The animosity was gone, replaced by a deep and genuine friendship. She had learned that innovation wasn't always a threat, and he had learned that tradition had a wisdom that couldn't be coded. One cool evening, a few weeks after the planting was complete, Agnes and Leo stood before their creation. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow on the fresh green leaves. The tiered garden was thriving. Tiny red nubs of strawberries were visible on the plants in the top tier. The air smelled of damp earth, cedar, and the faint promise of rosemary. It was peaceful. It was perfect. As they turned to head back inside, Agnes's foot brushed against something at the very back edge of the shared plot, near the old fence line that separated their property from the wild green belt behind it. It was a section of the garden they hadn't touched yet, designated for a future compost expansion. That she frowned, peering down into the encroaching twilight. A small patch of soil, no bigger than a dinner plate, had been freshly turned, was neat, deliberate. In the very center of the disturbed earth sat a single, strange plant. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. Its leaves were a deep, iridescent purple, almost black, with veins that seemed to shimmer with a faint, silvery light. It was exotic, alien, and vaguely unsettling. "Leo," she said slowly, her brow furrowed. "Did you plant this?" He came over, following her gaze. He leaned in, his expression mirroring her own confusion. "No, I've never seen anything like it. Is it one of yours?" "Absolutely not," she said, her botanist's mind racing through its vast catalog and coming up empty. "I have no idea what it is." They stood there in the fading light, the quiet satisfaction of the evening suddenly pricked by a needle of intrigue. The garden, their hard-won sanctuary of order and compromise, held a new secret. The plant sat there in the dark soil, its strange, shimmering leaves seeming to watch them. It wasn't one of hers. It wasn't one of his. Where had it come from? Who had planted this silent, beautiful, and deeply mysterious intruder in their midst? The last ray of sun caught its leaves, and for a fleeting instant they seemed to glow from within. The war was over, but Agnes had a sudden, thrilling, and slightly unnerving feeling that the story of their garden was far from finished. The tranquil peace of the newly christened Harvest and Heritage Garden lasted for precisely 12 minutes. It was shattered not by an argument or a cinder block, but by the silent, shimmering presence of the unknown plant. Agnes knelt, her knees sinking into the damp soil, her senses on high alert. Her botanist's mind, a finely tuned instrument for classification, was drawing a complete and utter blank. The leaves were the texture of wax, but felt warm to the touch, like skin. The iridescent purple-black seemed to drink the last of the evening light, while the silvery veins pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence. It wasn't just reflecting light, it felt like it was creating it. "Don't touch it," she commanded, her voice low and urgent. As Leo reached out a curious finger, he pulled his hand back. "What is it? Some kind of exotic orchid?" "No orchid I've ever encountered," she murmured, her gaze forensic. "The leaf structure is all wrong. It's symmetrical in a way that feels unnatural, engineered." Leo naturally turned to technology. He pulled out his phone, opened his favorite plant identification app, and carefully framed the mysterious specimen. The app whirred, its digital brain cross-referencing millions of images. After a moment, it rendered its verdict. Result: Poa pratensis, common lawn grass. Confidence: 2%. Leo stared at the screen, then at the pulsating, otherworldly plant. "Well, that was useless, because it's not in the database," Agnes said, a thrill of academic curiosity, warring with a deep-seated unease. "Which means it's either an undiscovered species, a highly obscure hybrid, or," she trailed off, "or what? Or it's not from around here," she finished softly, the words hanging in the air with a weight far greater than their simple meaning. They made a pact. They wouldn't touch it. They would observe. For the next 3 days, the mystery plant became the focal point of their shared existence. Leo set up a time-lapse camera on a tripod, angled down at the strange specimen. Agnes took meticulous notes in a leather-bound journal: soil pH, ambient temperature, changes in coloration. The findings were baffling. The plant didn't seem to engage in photosynthesis in any traditional sense. During the day it was dormant, its leaves curled slightly, the inner light dimmed, but at night, it unfurled and came alive. The time-lapse footage was mesmerizing. It showed the plant growing at an astonishing rate between sunset and sunrise. Its leaves spreading, its central stem thickening. The silvery veins would pulse with a soft, rhythmic light, casting strange dancing shadows on the fence behind it. More unnerving were its effects on the surrounding environment. A small patch of clover a foot to its left withered and died, turning a desiccated brown as if all the moisture had been sucked from it. Yet the new eglantine's triumph, cutting a good 10 feet away, seemed to be thriving with unnatural vigor. A new bud, far too early for its growth cycle, was already beginning to form on its stem. The mystery plant wasn't just growing, it was projecting an aura, an influence that seemed to harm some plants and supercharge others. It's changing. The soil, Agnes reported on the third evening, showing Leo her notes. The nitrogen levels around the base are off the charts, but the potassium has been completely depleted. It's like a tiny, biological terraforming engine. And look at this, Leo said, pointing to a graph on his tablet. He'd placed a small environmental sensor near the plant. There's a measurable energy spike from its location every night. Right around 2 a.m., it's faint, but it's a distinct electromagnetic frequency. Their old conflict had been about aesthetics and methodology. This was something else entirely. This was a genuine scientific anomaly, blooming silently at the edge of their garden. Their investigation turned outward. Who could have planted it? They became reluctant detectives, observing their neighbors with new, suspicious eyes. Stan from the board. Unlikely. His idea of horticulture was a weed whacker. Brenda, she dealt in heirlooms, not alien-looking specimens. Their gaze fell on Mrs. Gable. They saw her one afternoon, standing at her own living room window, looking out not at them, but at the back of the garden. Her expression unreadable. She knew, Leo whispered to Agnes as they pruned the tomatoes. When she got those anonymous complaints, she never said who they were from. What if one was about this? What if she knows what it is? The paranoia began to set in. Was the plant a gift from a secret admirer of their work? A prank from a disgruntled neighbor? Or was it a warning? A new, more insidious form of horticultural warfare. By the fifth night, they knew they couldn't just leave it. The plant had nearly doubled in size. Its luminescence was now bright enough to read by, casting an ethereal purple glow over that corner of the garden. The area of withered grass around it was expanding. We have to move it, Agnes declared, her voice firm. We can't risk what it might do to the rest of the garden. We'll excavate it, pot it, and I'll keep it in the shed where I can contain it. You mean we'll be roommates with that thing? Leo asked, half joking, but a shiver ran down his spine. Unless you have a better idea. He didn't. The next day, they approached the task with the caution of a bomb disposal squad. They wore thick gardening gloves and brought 2 shovels and a large ceramic pot. As Agnes plunged her spade into the earth, a good foot from the plant's base, she hit something hard. Strange, she grunted. A rock. She and Leo began to dig carefully around the obstruction. It wasn't a rock. As they cleared the soil, the unmistakable glint of tarnished metal appeared. It was a small box. But as they cleared more dirt, they realized it wasn't a box. The plant's root system, a dense fibrous web of silvery threads, was wrapped tightly around it, and the object wasn't a box. It was buried treasure of a different sort. After several minutes of carefully snipping the clinging roots, Leo lifted it from the earth. It was a small, square locket, attached to a broken chain. It was made of silver, blackened with age, and dirt, a delicate, Art Nouveau engraving of a flower. The very same flower as the plant before them was etched on its surface. What on earth? Leo breathed. Agnes took the locket from him, her hands trembling slightly, her fingers deft. From years of handling delicate seeds, found the tiny clasp. With a faint click, it sprang open. They both leaned in, peering into the locket's interior. On the left side, protected under a sliver of yellowed glass, was not a photograph, but a tiny, perfectly pressed and preserved flower, an identical, miniature version of the mystery plant. But it was the right side that made Agnes's breath catch in her throat. It was a photograph, a tiny sepia-toned, faded portrait. But it wasn't of a person, it was of the garden, their garden. But it was different, younger, wilder. She recognized the old oak tree at the far end, but the houses of Willow Creek Commons weren't there yet. It was a picture of the land as it had been decades ago, and standing in the middle of the field, her hand resting on a smaller version of the same strange plant, was a young woman with dark, knowing eyes and a faint, secretive smile. A woman neither of them had ever seen before. The mystery of what the plant was suddenly eclipsed by a far greater one. The question was no longer where it came from. The question was when. This strange, luminous flower wasn't an invader. It was a native. It had been here long before they had. And someone, the ghost in the photograph, had a connection to it and had just decided to bring it back. The roots of this mystery, Agnes realized with a dizzying certainty, went far deeper than the soil of their small garden. They went deep into the history of the land itself.